and then there were two. Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Coast EVs, your fortnightly fast charge on electric vehicles and infrastructure. Sorry for the switcheroos. We are being battered by weather, and we have various engagements this week, once which were on the next couple of days and then which were delayed, and we bounced around a little bit, but we'll possibly be joined by Eric if he's got our latest memo, but if not, Walter and I will crack on and try to dissect some charging hubs. So quick reminder, we are available next day on audio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, all of your usual places. And then you can also catch now, because I did update it today, thanks to Paul for the reminder, plugandplayev.com/coast-2-coast-evs. That's where you'll find our latest guests, topics, and I'll try and get them updated for Q1 as soon as we have a few more confirmations. So Walter and I flying duo this evening. How are you, Walter?
So far, so good. Pretty busy. As you said, I was kind of jerked around a little bit with scheduling as a result of the storm that hit the southeast, and those people are not geared up to remove snow, so they basically just hunker down and wait till it to melt, sun come out, sort of thing.
Yep, there's not a crew of snow plowers waiting to crank out the snow and salting the roads and everything.
I think there's 4 in the entire state of Florida.
All right, well, that's some other infrastructure that we need to build, I guess. But we will crack on. Let us know where you are, what you drive, if we don't already know. If we do already know it, let us know anything interesting that you've been driving, charging, considering driving in future, all that good stuff. And we'll get to the viewer questions and comments in the near future here. So in the news, there's plenty in the news. We are not short of topics, but we're sticking with positive for the start here. And big shout out to the Arkansas e-traveler who did a little tour of Walmart's increasingly large new campus over in Bentonville, Arkansas. This is kind of big. First of all, one of my New Year's resolutions is to cover more AC charging initiatives. I think they're going to be bigger this year. We're already seeing some of the funding starting to go to community charging, multifamily dwellings, that kind of thing. And we've spoken some interesting solutions in the past with It's Electric, Pando Electric over on the West Coast, and kind of Walmart fits into this quite nicely. Walter's done a great job, obviously, alongside Landon at the Arkansas e-traveler of covering some of the DC fast charging side, but 300 AC plugs at their new headquarters in Bentonville, which is starting to expand and take shape. That's nothing to sniff at, right, Walter? I know you've communicated with Landon pretty significantly about this, but what jumps out at you as you start to kind of see what's actually happening there?
I have, yeah. And the news reports, Landon and I have Google alerts placed for anything Walmart electric vehicle. And lots of times we hear about the specials for electric vehicle chargers at Walmart and things like that as a result of those alerts. But this time it was real news. And very quickly he was able to go get site videos and confirm that the reports are accurate, because lots of times the reports can be overly optimistic, but in this case it was spot on. And what jumped out to me first off was that it's ChargePoint, which also is the DC fast charging vendor that they've selected for their stores, at least as far as we know. And so the relationship deepens there. So the build of a new campus, they were forward thinking with what they were going to need in order to sustain this campus long term. They've got renewable goals in their corporate charter. And so when they started to put in electric vehicle chargers, the tally, according to Landon, ended up to be 300, which is what the headlines read. And he was able to confirm that. So very exciting. I think it's going to be a model for the future that when corporate America starts to build new campuses, it's just a foregone conclusion that employee level 2 charging will be a part of the design.
And I was seeing, they're fairly low power in 6.6 kilowatt, just that kind of older level 2 installation, pretty standard stuff. He wasn't sure at the time because he couldn't actually get on them if they were going to be shared 3.3, which starts to get into something of a bummer perhaps, but even at that level, it's a free charge, right? Assuming they don't start to bake it into employee packages, perks, anything like that. But even at that level, for a long work day, 10, 12 hours potentially, if you're arriving in, maybe a bit shorter, but built up over the week with that number of charges, that's pretty much going to take care of your commuting needs in that area, I assume.
Yeah, so I'm getting ready to prep a level 1 video, and I've been doing some research. There's actually a top end of level 1 that can touch 240, and it's the 3 kilowatt range for that throughput. And so 240 at 3 kilowatts is, in my opinion, sufficient for a daily commute. It's more than sufficient. Even 110 at 1.2 kilowatts or something, you'd probably get by as long as you're not going over 50 miles per day. So for someone who is a corporate office dweller like me, who just has a daily commute as a part of their grind, a outlet of any form is welcome, but a fully functional level 2 charger is even better. And free 99, you really can't beat that price. Lots of times corporate America is just trying to coax workers to come back into an office, and free charging is definitely one way of doing that.
Yeah, and the commute tends to be, if you think about it, I mean, I know some people hop on the interstate and hop off, but a lot of the times it's slower driving. You're not going quite as, harem scarum as you might on a road trip to try and, get there as quickly as possible. So the electrons go a little bit further in that sense. The efficiency starts to eke out more from, even if you're just getting that kind of, across through a day, 20 kilowatt hours. That's a solid chunk over 4 miles per kilowatt hour, perhaps.
Yeah, and think about it from Walmart's perspective. That you have employees standing around the office not wanting to leave because their car is still charging. Be like, no, that's all right. I'll work for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Start to throttle it, tie it to people's desks, and see how long they
you can't get rid of them.
Outside of this news.
And I mentioned I was getting ready to go on a trip up the East Coast, and I was looking at level 2 charging options along the way. And I recently watched one of your videos as well, where you're doing overnight hotel charging. And as you say, it's such a terrific opportunity for people who are on trips in order to coordinate longer stops, either meals if you're not DC fast charging, or overnight stays where there's a level 2 charger. And as these become more and more prolific, I understand there's multiple headlines of wins for major hotel brands putting in level 2 chargers at their properties. And it's not just being lip service actually occurring. As this becomes more and more common, DC fast chargers actually start to diminish in importance, because if you travel, let's just say 8 hours a day, you only need a couple of DC fast chargers. You don't need as many as you do if you're overnight staying with a level 2.
Yeah, and I think we'll get onto this in a little bit as we kind of progress to different types of charging station and hub. But a lot of the trouble with metro area DC fast charging is just crunch of people who are either apartment dwellers who need to top up for their commute, a bunch of different scenarios, but it's a very different beast in a city or a suburb to fast charge. Just looking at Greater Boston myself, it's constantly full now. Every Electrify America is packed out, maybe less so with EVgo's, charge points, that kind of thing. But even there, you may have to line up, and every person who's charged their vehicle on a level 2 during the day takes away potentially a 30-40 minute fast charge session that can go to somebody who's traveling or who really can't find any other way to charge their vehicle.
Exactly. Easy way to alleviate the DC fast chargers by allowing people who don't have a attached garage or a home ownership as a part of their routine in order to charge where they live or where they work. Either one of those two things solve the problem.
For sure. Well, we can't skip over the week's events because there is a change in Washington, and the NEVI headlines were pretty stark yesterday. I tend to be on the side of this was all expected. We pretty much figured, for anyone who didn't catch the news, I was trying to eagerly avoid it, but people kept on sending it my way, so I had to dive back in. As expected, a flurry of executive orders on the first few days of the Trump administration, slashing a lot of programs or attempting to signal intent to do so. To me, the NEVI piece, the NEVI and charging and fueling infrastructure, federally funded programs, were name checked, so obviously they are in the firing line as we expected, but I don't see anything significantly different than what we were anticipating to happen here. There's obviously a kick the door down, try and announce your intent. This is the first few days, first 100 days, in fact, is always well known as a flurry of activity and trying to kind of put your stamp on the office. Where this starts to gain some traction and the rubber meets the road is what funding can be clawed back. Now, the idea that NEVI stops today, this week, is kind of ridiculous. It's actually shown in my background here. I'm pretty sure that this site was federally funded, and we'll be able to kind of confirm that once it's going live here. But this is in West Virginia, coal country, deep red state, and it's a company that is installing. They're based in West Virginia, DC, America. They're installing Lincoln, there you go. Lincoln Electric Velion chargers that were made up in Ohio. This is a new industry. These things are being made in America. There's the compliance aspect of it to get the Build America, Buy America side. They're being made by American companies in the states often that they're being deployed within. And West Virginia, if anyone on the east of the Mississippi knows, they've driven through that state. Other than Tesla superchargers, and even sometimes with Tesla superchargers, that's a hard state to get through in an EV. These are going to go down to a couple of travel plazas. One's I think called Bluestone, the other one's in Beckley, so kind of the south of the state, and there's still a little bit of work to be done to get the north of the state kind of filled out. But this is what the NEVI program is doing. There's construction on the ground as we speak. Doesn't mean in the future, in a year, 2 years time, this won't kind of dry up and the funds will be, requisitioned, or that some states will potentially do the Florida and the Wyoming thing of just saying, well, we're not going to spend them. It can go back in the pot, whatever can happen. So there may be more of a patchwork rollout, which would be a shame, because the whole point of the NEVI program was to kind of fill these gaps and to create a comprehensive state-by-state, plan to fill every 50 miles, have a fast charger. So if some states decide to kind of opt out, that may leave them either behind the curve or leaving the private investment side to kind of fill the gaps. But from my perspective, still tracking this project, still looking at construction on the ground, cranes putting these things in. Walter, so what your first kind of takeaways, and certainly the private investment side? I know we've covered a lot, but what are you thinking?
Well, I actually watched the entirety of the inauguration speech, and by and large, what the speech entailed was discussion about economics and how to improve economics. And there was a couple of forks in the speech that seemed out of place. One of which was when he mentioned the death of the new Green Deal and stopping funding for EVs. He actually used pretty stark, direct terms. And I feel as though it's not a part of what President Trump's desires are, but I think the Republican Party is trying to derail another Obamacare long-term success story out of the Democratic Party, because the NEVI program originated in a bipartisan infrastructure bill, so it had bipartisan support. But should it be successful in deploying DC fast chargers around the country, and it is looked back upon with Biden's name all over it, that could be a political problem. So I actually don't think President Trump, with Elon Musk standing in close quarters to him, has any animosity towards electric vehicles. I actually think it's Republican leadership trying to derail a long-term success story coming out of the Democratic Party, which is unfortunate. It's just a sad state of affairs that here we are trying to better the lives of American citizens by putting in infrastructure that is also generating fuel for public transportation or for private transportation from domestically sourced energy, and is being derailed because what I suspect to be a sad cocktail of politics. So, and whether or not it is derailed or not, I think is going to take a little while to sort through. You know this a lot better than I do, but listening to the speech, it did seem like a inappropriate fork in what he was generally talking about. There was a couple other ones that he just was taking like side jabs that seemed to be off topic, but by and large, the inauguration speech was generally talking about economics.
And that's the other piece. Kind of, we haven't got definitive rule kind of intent on the EV tax credit yet. That seems to be we're reviewing. But the critical minerals side was an interesting part for me. There seemed to be a kind of undertone of protecting U.S. Materials and US generation of critical minerals. Batteries don't seem to be something that is being targeted as heavily, and I think there seems to be a kind of a gap in that, or a chink in the door, leaving it open a little bit for stuff like the significant investment down in your area, down in Georgia, down in all of these kind of battery plants, or the OEMs that are starting to invest a lot in those communities, because there's real potential for, as you say, political blowback. But one is an iconic kind of thing of just the program succeeding, but the other is actual jobs and people on the ground who are voters, potentially losing jobs if it really was to come down to we're closing factories, we're getting rid of battery production in the US. I mean, that starts to ship those jobs right back where they came, and you're taking a significant step back at that point. And yes, there's some leeway to do that for the next year or two, but eventually election season rolls around again, and we have to start explaining where those jobs went.
Yeah, the Green New Deal is an unfortunate brand. And really what we're talking about is the infrastructure bill, which was bipartisan as a result of trying to recoup from the economic devastation that the COVID quarantine placed on our society. Really, that's what this all came about. And this, what you could call this pork or Democratic pork, I'm not quite sure, but it was part of the overarching infrastructure bill. It is passed and everyone was enthusiastic about it. And what we're seeing now are the fruits of that bill being passed. And it attempting to be short-circuited here is disconcerting. Either way, though, I think the electric vehicle industry will be just fine. There's multiple events coming up that indicate that with or without the backing of the federal government, the progression of electric vehicle adoption will proceed. At least that's the take I'm feeling.
Yep. Well, we are not in dull times, and there will be plenty to kind of analyze as we go forward, and see what's actually being built. That's the biggest piece. Is there's always a lagging indicator here, so it's kind of awkward to claim that something's been killed when for the next 12 months these stations are going to be opening, because there's steel in the ground already. There's crews that are basically just waiting to light these things up, including the the President Musk sideshow of his company is going to be activating a bunch of these things. So
which is the second or third highest award for NEVI.
The funding amounts, there's a little bit because Tesla sites come in cheaper, but they've got just behind Francis Energy as far as the number goes.
Right.
Ports, because they tend to put in 12, 16 instead of 4 or 6. So
it's a lot of money to walk away from.
Interesting optics as we go forward, and Tesla starts to light up with a lot more federal money. Anyway, that is much ado about NEVI, and we will draw a line under it. We're going to jump to the comments here. I want to make sure we get everybody in and don't go too far over with the news. So good evening to Yoel Traveler, Mackie Rally Driver in Southeast Michigan. We're at 0 degrees Fahrenheit this morning. Yes, I didn't quite get that low, but I was trying to push my Ioniq 5's battery conditioning to its limits, and it takes a while to warm up when it's that temperature. Trust me, I sat in it and know. But thank you for reporting in from the frigid north. Mike Mahan, the opposite end of the spectrum, 80 degrees Fahrenheit there in Southern California. Don't rub it in too much. I hope you are feeling better though, Mike, and I'm glad to read that the fires are getting under control. That's certainly something we were thinking of you guys last time out, and haven't seen it as much in the headlines, but glad they're starting to move in the right direction at least. Bill B, hello from Tampa, Florida. Audi Q8 e-tron. Don't know if the snow got that far south, but I know Walter has some plans for Florida in the future, so I'm hoping it clears up very quickly here. Paul in a 2020 Chevy Bolt EV, Bakersfield, California. Thank you for the nudge to update the calendar channel and for the Coast to Coast show. I'm glad to get that up, and we'll be trying to put in some interesting topics in the near future here. Big Barney over in Western New York, a little bit of a site for NEVI action recently. So as we get into the topic, Jamestown, New York, Westfield, New York, I think all had NEVI sites go live in the last couple of weeks. So big deal over there. Hopefully those will help. Electrified light vehicles, afternoon, evening votes. What's on the menu? Tonight we are doing, as I think Walter helped me out, charging hubs, EV charging essentials, what we expect to see at different types of sites, and we'll be trying to carve a little bit of a distinction between travel corridor sites and more metro, we want to say Iona, for at least the rechargery in Apex, and probably touching on some of Walter's recent site visits there. Good evening to Crazy Postman. Howdy, indeed, over in the center of the country there. Andy Getch, hello from Fort Myers, Florida. Good evening. 2021 Ford Mustang Mach-E and the 2017 Smart 4.2 for around town use, I'm sure. Mark Berenger, cheers from Newcastle, Ontario, Canada. Happily driving a Kia EV6, probably the same kind of battery preconditioning as me, so I hope it works for you. Yoldi Traveler's snow removal plan is spring. Yes, that's a familiar thing. It starts to get a bit old unless you're in the ski country around February. It starts to be, how long is it going to take to get the temperatures to melt this crud? Steve P is besting us all by the looks of it. -9. I'm assuming that's Fahrenheit. Could be Celsius, I guess. And Kona EV. Kona Electric turned on just fine. Missed the slow cranking of my ice in this cold. True. There's lots of stuff. We probably could have done a winter episode, actually. But...
Yeah, and I was actually looking. ChargePoint had some recommendations for what to do with an EV in cold weather, and one of them is help your ice neighbors by giving them a jump, because EVs start right up, and you can use jumper cables in order to help jump your ice neighbors.
Is the truth. And my wife just came in from a few different trips to go ice skating about 20-30 miles away, and every time she comes in she's saying, I'm amazed how this car does in the snow. It's just, stick it in snow mode, big low battery and center of gravity, it eats up those miles. So we're pretty happy with it so far. Tom Palmer, San Diego 2020 Bolt EV, thank you for joining us. And there we go, we have the Arkansas e-Traveler Landon in the chat. Thanks for covering that for us. We appreciate it. It was a good site visit, and it's nice to have. We've both communicated with Landon, but it's really good to have someone in that area of the country, because it's not easy to report on that stuff other than press releases, and sometimes these things go quiet and you can't really tell what's going on. So to have someone on the ground able to kind of swing through and look at stuff is very valuable. Thank you for that. And on the subject of level 2, Steve has 8 level 2 chargers at his office, large battery storage being installed over by Shriner's Auditorium. I think you know what that is, Steve. I probably do. I've actually seen a few projects that I mean to cover. The channel is mostly about EVs, but I kind of want to get into energy storage and some of the kind of projects we have around here. There's a geothermal community down in Framingham, Massachusetts, that's kind of a pilot project for, dedicated sectioned off geothermal housing, so I'm kind of interested in that, but that will take a little more reading on my part, so I have enough information to be dangerous. Let's see, on the subject of commutes, the old traveler has 50 miles a day and 1.2 kilowatts is fine enough for him, so that's a household outlet by the sound of it. So yeah, if you can get enough time to get it on the plug when you get in and have a routine, then that can work pretty nicely.
Yes, 12 hours right there.
For sure, excuse me. Okay, Dennis is over in Michigan, I believe. He has his 3.6 kilowatts for 2 EVs. Even better. There you go. Obviously, these things can work as long as you have the kind of routine that makes it on the plug for long enough, or a short enough commute to make it not matter. Emery, my wife's car just died unexpectedly. Any crazy low lease deals on Ioniq 5 or EV6 out there? Lease deals may be the way, actually. I just read something that people were having the federal tax credit taken off their potential purchases, even before all the kind of potential for it to go away as a federal ruling. There is something with, Ioniq 5s came into the list from the Treasury that they were going to qualify as purchases, and now they've been taken off briefly. Sometimes that happens around the start of the year. There's a bit of to and fro in the paperwork. I think
paperwork, yeah. Yeah, it was off for about 3 weeks, something like that last year.
Yeah. So assuming, all things being equal and no federal changes, depending on what happens with the new administration, that should qualify, but it may force some of the money in January and maybe early February towards deals because they are lease deals because they can still take that as a commercial credit and pass them on.
In the Nissan area, if they don't mind slower charging, is an outstanding lease deal. I think it's still going on, and I looked at it long and hard, and I was having a hard time walking away from actually going in to sign paperwork. So
to replace the Volvo or just for a third EV?
yeah, no, not a third. Yeah, to replace the Volvo, and I mean, I don't know. I like the Volvo, and there's really no reason to replace it. There's nothing wrong with the thing. It still works fine. I just like new shiny things, I guess.
It's hard to walk away from some of those better lease deals there. Chase over on the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, Grid Connections podcast. Thank you for joining us. I have to hop off shortly, but looking forward to watching. Yeah, I think a bunch of people do that. Come in to say hello, listen to what we have in the news, and then have to catch it the next day. Totally understand. The evening is tough for everybody, but yeah, it's always available next day on audio replay. So definitely catch that by around lunchtime. This is the place to be for some fire EV news on a cold day. Ernst, thank you for warming us up a little bit. It's definitely freezing out there, and the news is hot most evenings here. Leonard, good evening, EV nerds. Indeed, we resemble that remark. Thanks for joining us. Scott Goslin, good evening from cold Central Florida, Central Illinois, 2017 Chevy Bolt EV. As we get more and more of these kind of stories, and people in Illinois especially, I'm thinking back to this time last year when we were discussing disastrous Tesla events in Chicago and people charging in awkward places. I don't think I've seen any of those yet, other than the Cybertruck that couldn't get out.
No, and I just talked to my mom. She said it's bitterly cold in Chicago. I don't know where the headlines are. We would expect that to start occurring, but I guess it was solved. Or maybe it wasn't actually a story in the first place or something.
Yeah, people got bored of reporting it, but we'll see. Still, the winter is young, so there's still time. Bashom, hello from Buffalo, 2024 Cadillac Lyric. There you go, represent. And 5 degrees there. We're all down in these single digits. And I think we have introduced, once we get through Todd Holter, thank you for joining us. And Vlad, good evening from frigid Motor City. That is everybody and their various cold places, except for Mike, who is nice and warm in Southern California. So glad for that, at least. And we'll move on to our main topic for this evening, which is, well, is partially this, really. When is a hub not a hub? Now, I did a video not too long ago on charging hubs and probably generated more questions for myself than I actually answered. With looking at BP Pulse, and Walter can speak to this a little bit, but the giga hub term, and whether a hub is just a bunch of chargers in one place, or if it needs a certain amount of amenities, if it should have 24/7 access, should be a certain power level, whether it needs to be within X number of miles or meters or whatever you want to kind of define it as, of a interstate or some kind of main travel corridor. But I thought it was interesting, and Walter, some of your recent site reviews, especially with the Apex site from Iona, have kind of got into this area where it may not score as highly on some of the review criteria because it's further away from an interstate. And we start to get into an area where we've always defined sites a little bit by metro and kind of community versus corridor and travel, but we've been very focused on travel because we want to fill gaps, we want to get across the country, we want to do these fun road trips. But more and more, if we start to get the Iona kind of model of providing a third place, interesting place to go and charge, something that's maybe just something of an asset for the community, a hub could just as easily be 5, 10, 20 miles away from an interstate and not even worry about travelers. So I don't know, we want to start in here and kind of think about what a hub means to you, and do these gigahub terminologies mean anything more than just fun names on a map?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And there's so it used to just be that if there was a charger in a parking lot, it counted as an EV charging station, and there was not different delineations of types of EV charging stations. It's like yes or no. Is there an EV charger there, or is there not an EV charger there? But as you say, currently in press releases from multiple different CPOs, we're hearing the term flagship, we're hearing the term gigahub, and these new unique terms that are being coined by marketing departments. And I work in technology, and there's a company called Gartner that loves to create terms in order to put framework around burgeoning technologies so they could be tracked and things like that. That kind of feels like what's going on here is that they're trying to put into different boxes the different types of charging services that are offered. And I was thinking about it on the train ride home, and I don't have a definitive answer, but I would say if there's gas pumps present, is probably not a hub. So that's one delineation I can express. A hub to me, whether it be a gigahub or a hub, an EV charging hub, is got to be built from the ground up for the sole purpose of charging electric vehicles. I would say that alone is a given. From there, we could probably discuss other things that should be included in what an EV charging hub is.
Well, let's kind of side through. I mean, obviously, we want to hear folks in the comments let us know what kind of defines a charging hub for you potentially, or would that kind of be something you would look at? Is it just a retrofitted gas station, and there are still liquid fueling options there, or could it be something that is a hybrid site, and that's just fine as long as it has a significant power level or stall count, whatever kind of would make it qualify for you? But we have a bunch of examples, and Walter, you've been to a couple of these recently. Well, not the one in California, obviously, but the Tesla site in Halifax. Is that correct? The Oasis?
It is, yeah, Halifax.
Halifax, North Carolina, right? So that I believe at the moment is at least the largest charging hub site, whatever you want to call it, on the East Coast. And over on the West Coast, the Lost Hills site for Tesla is going to be enormous, and that's going to be another thing they call an Oasis. I don't know if these all fall into the same category that's intentionally used, or if they just happen to be at a site that said Oasis on the East Coast and the Oasis is the name for the West. But what would you, taking away from that kind of first visit and how it struck you as a place to charge in general?
Well, as far as the Oasis on the East Coast, what happened was there was a rather sleepy convenience store that wasn't doing very well that said yes to allow Tesla to put in chargers on their site. And then a Dieselgate pair got installed also. And the thought was that would help get them some extra customers. It's in kind of a desolate area of North Carolina near something called Roanoke Rapids, which is a bit of a closet vacation community in the northern portion of North Carolina, kind of near the Virginia border. But there's not a lot of population around there, but there is a lot of land. And so this convenience store apparently had a lot of land. And I'm thinking someone from Tesla came by and said, how much of that land are you willing to give up? And someone said the wrong thing, and they showed up and started to use it. And so their site plans ballooned. And what we ended up with was a very large 60 stall implementation. And apparently they got the power also, because there's 3 different transformers just for the Tesla chargers. I think all 3 are 2500. I know at least 2 for all the version 4 dispensers. They're 2500 kVA. So I think it's a total throughput of 7,500 kVA. So I don't think it was originally intended to be what it became. I think that just kind of happened through organic growth and something that was opportunistic. On the West Coast, though, we're talking about something completely different. That's property that Tesla is purchasing, and that's going to be something much more unique. And them sharing the name is a bit of an oddity. I don't know if that's deliberate or not, but we have, the largest charging station on the East Coast is at a location called the Oasis, and it's 60 Tesla V4 stalls. And when you look at the rendering of what's going into the West Coast, very similar. So we have to assume at least there was someone, maybe crossing two pieces of paper at the same time and then decided to use the same name or something.
And it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's a travel term, certainly. Once you get to I think Illinois certainly calls them the travel stops Oasis. That kind of parlance is common to travel fueling sites. So that may not be completely isolated and by itself. But in terms of, it's an interesting one. That site especially that you visited there's not much of a bigger distinction between the CCS charging option, and I say option singular because that double didn't even manage to make it by the sound of it. They had to retire one of them. But
It's
sad.
It's getting ready to tip over. I promise you, it's not going to last much longer.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's even magic docks there. I'm assuming not.
No.
Okay. So yeah, so that is not the best place to stop. If you're driving a Leaf, it's fine because I'm assuming the CPE 250 at least has a CHAdeMO head. So there's something in that, but everything else looks a little bit sad there. But I guess we'll move on to BP Pulse a little bit in a sec, but it kind of speaks to the, when you see an opportunistic move in a piece of land, that just immediately rings bells to me for Iona, because that's where they're kind of starting to make those land purchases, buying the thing outright and starting to build sites that, while they may not have 20, 30, 40 chargers at this point, are certainly in places where they're going to be certainly something of an oasis. If not titled that officially, they're going to be something like the one in Kansas and or the two in Kansas now. Those things are starting to look like very, very attractive places to stop on a stretch of I-70 that is pretty barren otherwise for charging. How are you thinking about when you come to charging hub, and obviously Iona is going to just build these things up out of old gas stations, that kind of meets the exact definition of what you're talking about, right? And it kind of puts it in an interesting future technology light as well, because they're getting rid of those old gas sites and making them into literally places that will be an epicenter for charging.
Well, I would refer back to the Tom Alogny interview of Ricardo Stantamini and Seth Cutler at Iona prior to the out-of-spec Cars and Coffee, where it was mentioned by Ricardo that they can't install 30,000 stalls in 5 years if they're only doing 10 stall, 12 stall stations. So many of their stations will be larger. So what I took away from that is their intention is to do multiple things. They're going to purchase property and put in things similar to what we see at Apex. They're going to use partnerships like what we've seen transpire with Sheets. And they're also going to build large gigahubs, for lack of a term. And it seems as though multiple CPOs simultaneously are all coming up with the same model, which is a large proliferation of smaller stations, both along interstates and in inner cities, as well as large crowd-pleasing large stations inside major metropolitan areas. And I'm not sure, but I think what that generates is excitement for the CPO brand. When you have a really large station, you're able to get trending on Instagram, and you're able to get us YouTubers to go and take pictures of the canopy and be excited about, wow, look at all this. It's the large grand finale crowd-pleasing installations that everyone wants to get their picture in front of. So it is kind of like a self-sustaining permanent marketing halo site, which provides that high-level image branding that is available. Because not only does Iona seem to be trending in that direction, as you mentioned, BP Pulse has that model. We have Shell Recharge lining up for that model. We have General Motors with their flagship locations lining up for that model. Tesla, obviously, as you mentioned, is lining up for that model. They do, typically 10, 16, 20 stalls. Sometimes they breach that a little bit, but then every now and again they move the scale way over, and you get these large crowd-pleasing stations that have canopies and all the fixings. So I think the reason all these marketing companies are coming up with a similar solution is that there is sound reasoning that we as non-market, or I should say me as a non-marketing professional, and maybe you could speak to it more than I, has for the model that they're designing around, because it is pretty clear that everyone seems to be trending in that direction.
Right. I mean, it's kind of, it's wanting to move on from the, chargers and a few parking lots, stalls in the back of a parking lot, certainly, but this is the next level, really. It's beyond just having a canopy and a little bit more. It's the evolution from the sideshow, which is kind of, we always appreciate a new station, but something that's in the side of a grocery store parking lot is significantly less interesting to us as EV nerds than something which starts to incorporate a dedicated lounge or a canopy or something that is pull through, a bunch of these different things. This is what we'll get onto, and how many of these amenities we really need versus just something nice to look at, like the one behind you there with the pile of flying J's. But it's kind of interesting what jumps out at people and what people feel is the necessary versus just the kind of new and shiny. So I want to jump to the comments here and get people's take on that initial question of what makes a hub. So Yoli Traveler, when it does not have a restroom 24/7, I'm assuming that is something that disqualifies it from being a hub, because you will want that access to something that, if it's focusing on charging, you definitely want somewhere to take care of business. So that would make sense to me, having 24/7 facilities, certainly, and restroom top among them. Quick, just back to the greetings to say good evening to Photogravity from the Mid-Atlantic. 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a heat wave in this particular circumstance. So I hope you're enjoying the balmy, summerish conditions. Mike has Rove close to him, which is pretty much one of the sites that kind of, Mike was actually in that video and kindly got me the footage from Rove in Santa Ana, California, which has that, a lot of the things we're talking about here: dedicated lounge, which is, I believe, 24/7 access, grocery store attached, car wash, which is
car wash. Yeah, I would love to have everyone have a car wash.
Yeah, everything is. It's not going to be a charging hub unless we can get that snow and grime off it.
Absolutely.
Don't bother washing your car at the moment. It's absolute waste of time and money, believe me. It's dirty again the day after. Big Barney goes for stall count for hubs, 12 or more stalls, which would definitely take a lot of them out of the picture, but would put something like the Giga Hub, might take some of them out, but the one down in Logan Airport is getting 20 stalls, I believe. But that's kind of what made me think about, and a lot of other people say, is this a hub really? Because, it depends what actually opens up, because we haven't seen it yet in its full glory. But at the moment, it just looks like a nice parking lot with amazing chargers, but bugger all else. There's a porta potty and a lot of rental car agencies trying to get their vehicles in and out of a parking lot adjacent. So
no facility at all.
Not that I could see. I mean, unless you're walking over to Hertz and begging to use the bathroom, there's a porta potty that's there, which could be left, but I wouldn't want to see that after a day of rideshare drivers, taking the day out on the Portaloo themselves. So that could be an interesting development. But that may be why it's not open yet. They may be installing much better amenities, so I don't want to do them down before I've had a chance to actually assess it properly. Tom agrees with Walter. We'd have to go back to just being a dedicated charging site rather than gas station for that kind of definition, I believe. Yoli Traveler, like Rove, Oriona, standalone model. Absolutely. Big Barney is looking for interstate access, so more of a travel focus there with that 12 plus stalls and easy access to interstate routes. Dennis has charging plus restroom access, dining and shopping perks. That's an interesting addition there, kind of customer loyalty points. Maybe we want to go into that for a second here, Walter, because, Pilot Flying J is one of those where you essentially did a, pure road trip on their network and with their facilities. I don't think, from what I've seen, my limited exposure, they've actually baked in any EV specific deals yet, but they do have the loyalty app and the rewards, that kind of thing, right?
Correct. Nothing tied to the chargers, but if you go in to buy a soda and you scan the QR code on the Pilot Flying J app, you get loyalty points for that. So that is correct. And I don't think there's any way of initiating a charge through the Pilot Flying J app either. You have to use the EVgo app. So,
but they are doing a pretty good job of getting those sites updated on their website. They're fairly prominently displayed in terms of pricing and which ones have EV charging stations. And knowing that the pricing is kind of a bugbear for a lot of people at Pilot Flying J, even with the excellent facilities, that may be a way to start to bake in a little bit of, well, if you're coming in and you redeem your coffee or whatever else you get from our store, maybe we give you X cents off per kilowatt hour. You start to get into a quid pro quo there.
Yes, I'm sure as a long standing convenience store operator, that's going to become something that they're going to evaluate pretty soon. They're going to see the foot traffic coming from the charging stalls and recognize that those two things should be connected.
We do kind of get a little bit ahead of ourselves on this stuff. I think, it's kind of like, we moan about the prices perhaps, or there's a lot of focus on this stuff, or why, they're not further along, but it's still very early days. I mean, even for someone like Pilot Flying J, have been at it for better parts of 18 months and have built essentially a nationwide network. It's still probably in the introductory pricing phase, just trying to figure out what the hell to charge and where to charge it.
If the goal is 500, there's, as you say, in early days of completing, and they definitely have their team down and they know how to get the job done. Initially, I think they were overly optimistic with suggesting that they were going to complete 200 this year. And there were some red tape things that slowed them down to some extent. But even when they did that very dramatic push to the finish at the end of the year, where they're opening 16 sites a week, just crazy breakneck speed. And by the way, today is what, the 22nd? Mm-hmm. They've opened no sites, so everyone went to the Bahamas or something after that. They've opened no sites. There's been a little bit of construction occurring, but they definitely have some cleanup work to do. However, as you say, they're still in the early phases. If this network is built out like we think it will, and I think there's nowhere else to go, because even if EVs continue on the trajectory that they're currently on, which I don't think they will, I think eventually what we're going to have is a double-digit growth. We've got GM lining up for just a terrific year with the relaunch of the Bolt towards the tail end of the year, and we've got lower trims coming into the lineup that were not available in 24. We have Tesla with their mixed bag of publicity occurring, which I actually think is going to end up in their favor, and multiple other brands announcing new models. So the EV revolution is here to stay, one way or the other, and I see no way to go but up. That being the case, the C-store operators now have to recognize that their core business has a growing customer segment that needs to be serviced. And so one way or the other, they could either allow them to go elsewhere, or they could put charging on their property and coax those people towards them. And since they've already started in the process, the 500 number, I don't think it's going to take them to 2030 to reach that. I think they'll be done with the 500 somewhere in 2027.
Okay, let's keep pushing through the thoughts on hubs and definitions here. Would say hubs, this is Leonard for audio listeners, would say hubs need to have canopies and dedicated services just for EV drivers. Canopies, again, is something that definitely attracts people, makes a statement for sure. Shelter, as we get into these snowy kind of conditions right now, rain, all that good stuff, is definitely nice to have. And then just from the hotter places, protecting the equipment from that kind of direct sun glare, burning, all that kind of stuff. So definitely from a maintenance point of view, those canopies could be valuable as well. Crazy Postman, a hub makes it sound like a hangout place. There needs to be some couches, coffees, food. Yeah, I mean, the one of the things that was interesting to me at the Iona site was the access via QR code, I think, to get into the lounge. So you can still use that facility, even though there's, some of it is reliant on the local business and the bakery, that kind of thing. You can still get in there and use some of that stuff kind of by your own devices, right?
Correct. And I also recently saw the plans for, is it the Colorado?
Yeah, Fruta in Western Colorado.
Fruta, yes. So there was someone who posted into PlugShare either yesterday or today a link to the plans, and you could zoom in, and there's two buildings. One is a detached restroom facility, and the other is a lounge, which doesn't look to have any type of food service. It looks like it's just vending, and really nice picture windows that overlook the charging bays, which are covered in canopies. So when you pull into the station, you'll connect your car, you'll get it charging. You could use a restroom in a detached facility, and then in a separate facility, go in and there's a counter where you can set up and watch your car charge underneath the canopy and hang out with fellow EV owners in a area that has a place to kick back and have vending machines. So the model of having a place to congregate, which goes back to this whole third space concept that Andrew Cornelia of Mercedes-Benz High-Power Charging was talking about, EV stations potentially becoming, I think is going to occur. Not only is it going to occur, I think that would probably, I think that was Big Barney who mentioned it. Was that the commenter who we're referring to?
Crazy Postman.
Hang out place. Oh, Crazy Postman. Yeah. So I think that is a fair assessment of what a hub is going to be, is a place where not only can you charge your car, but you can kick back and converse with other EV owners.
Let's keep on moving through so we don't miss anything. Mike Mahan has a hub needing restrooms. Number one complaint about some Tesla sites. Yeah, and even still, a lot of the recent NEVI sites for Tesla are still at hotels. Now, some of them do seem to have attached gas stations just near them and stuff to walk to, but I still find that people don't seem to mind it. But negotiating access to a restroom in a hotel just seems like something that would be awkward to me. That seems to happen mostly, at least if the NEVI sites are anything to go with. Francis Energy and Tesla seem to be pretty happy to put them at hotel chains.
Yeah, so the new Tesla 120 mall in Bakersfield has no facility whatsoever. I really don't understand it. It's adjacent to a gas station and a hotel, and that's it. And you have not only 120 people, let's just say it packs out one day, which apparently these stations, according to Eric, and I wish he was here this evening to speak to it, do pack out. Let's just say that it's not 100, it's 120 cars. So inside each car is multiple people. You've got a small stadium worth of a crowd having to use a restroom because they're on a road trip and they stop to refuel, and there's two non-attached gas stations. I don't understand what's going on there. So hopefully that is just not a complete site, and they're still in the process of adding the facilities for the restrooms. Because if you're going to put in 120 stalls, surely you have to have some kind of attached something.
It's a lot of bladders, as I used to say.
A lot, yeah. And I know it's a desert, but surely they're not trying to use a bio method to replenish the desert's dryness or whatever.
Form of geothermal heating loop at that point. There's all kinds of great ideas coming out of that. We do want to revisit actually the concept of people going in and using the facilities without paying, because that was brought up by Anthony last time as a kind of incongruent piece of do EV drivers bring money to a site, or are they potentially a money loser? I want to get onto that in a little bit, so just put a pin in it, but I want to answer this question first. From Scott Wilson, this behind me, there are two of these sites, I believe. They're the new travel plazas that are going in. Beckley is one. This one, I think, is the Bluestone Travel Plaza. So I think they're in the south of the state. That was the only downside of them when I looked at the map and got excited about West Virginia getting charging, was that it was quite far down. But pretty much anything at this point is a bonus. My wife is actually traveling through in the next week or so with our Ioniq 5, and although they could potentially make it on dealership charging, they're going to stop in Parkersburg, I believe, for level 2 charging overnight. So there's ways through it, but the idea that we're in 2025 and you can't fast charge anywhere in the States, or very, very little outside of cities, is a little bit.
I was stuck on a level 1 because it was the only thing available for a little bit in a hard portion of eastern Kentucky into Western Virginia.
Mm-hmm. Right, and there's I believe there's a national park there. There's one of the gorges, and a beautiful state in general, right? There's skiing there, so it's kind of
the whole state is spectacular. It's just beautiful.
So, but nowadays you're thinking about it. When I think about where I've been, it's always around it. It's I-81, kind of Virginia to the south, or Ohio, and maybe I've been through it in that little sliver that goes between Pennsylvania and Ohio, but it would be one of those places you'd kind of probably think to avoid at the moment because of, as an EV driver, because it's just a bit more challenging than the states around it. And that goes back to that NEVI piece of these are filling in the gaps. Or even if, just really quick aside, even if this does nothing else, every state now that was interested in NEVI funding has made a plan and has identified these areas on alternative fuel corridors where they want to put these things and where it would be a good option. So if there's a resurgence in this, if the administration loses interest, or if private companies come in to fill it, or state funds fill it, whatever it is, the agencies and the departments of transport in these states have at least gone through the exercise of looking at the map, seeing where the power is, figuring out where they need to put this stuff and what kind of solutions will help them out. And they'll have that ready to roll if and when funding comes back, if it is suddenly made unavailable. But let's keep cracking. Mark Berenger, for me, a hub would have multiple stalls, more than 8, including pull-throughs, rest areas, maybe the option of L2 for longer stay and a sit-down meal. L2 is an interesting shout. We definitely always talked about that as a backup in the past. It was more of a bailout plan for sites that were not reliable, or you wanted to have the option. But Eric always raised the option of people who work at these places being able to electrify, and it comes a destination charger at that point because they got an 8-10 hour shift. They can plug in their vehicle.
Yeah, so I've watched Brandon flash videos on loop when I'm doing road tripping on pretty frequently, and he does a very good job of teaching what it takes in order to get a DC fast charger in the ground, the 3-phase 4-wire, and the electronics, and the size of the transformer, and all those things, and whether or not the site is load balanced and microgridded, or many other different things. But one of the things that is a challenge in a site that's being fed from a transformer to feed DC fast chargers is to then put in level 2. You would think it would just be easy, but it's not, because you're going from, let's see, 1440 to 480 to 270, and then you have to get a secondary panel in order to break that out into the voltage for the level 2, which is what, 240. And the problem is the step down transformer is a pretty hefty cost for a site that is already pretty expensive, and what you're getting is not a lot of bang for your buck. So most of the time they don't include that. But in the new Bakersfield 120 stall Tesla site, there is level 2 chargers that are put in there, which is interesting, because if those are just like free chargers, and lots of times when they have some of these mega sites, they put in some level 2 just for free chargers, those are actually encouraging people to spend money at the location's businesses, because now you're plugging in and you're going to be there for a couple of hours. So you're going to go into the Chili's and you're going to have a meal. If you're plugged at a Tesla supercharger, I can't tell you how many times I've been to a Tesla supercharger, and everyone stays in their car because they just charge too damn fast. And you're in and out in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 max, whatever. So if there's level 2, what you're doing as a CPO is encouraging people to spend money with the local business. So at least that's my opinion.
And it also kind of ties back to the hotel, right? I mean, a dedicated fast charging site at a hotel is one thing, but then having that extra benefit of, whatever it is, a couple of L2 plugs probably isn't enough nowadays, but with the combined with the DC fast charging, maybe that's okay, because maybe you could have a smaller number of level 2 people may take them up and they'll be there all night, fine, but then you've got the backup option of a DC fast charger. You're not going hunting somewhere else to get that charge, either when you arrive tired or next morning when you've got a potentially cold soaked pack and all that good stuff. Let's see. Anthony has a question on the line of, all essential amenities being equal, which DC fast charging installation strategy will be more appealing to road trippers? Big charging hubs or 10 to 12 stall stations? And just to answer a couple here below, Anthony, Big Barney wants big hubs, no weights. So mostly for Big Barney, it's about stall count and throughput. So also power kind of goes hand in hand with that, because you want to be able to max out those charge rates and get people through quickly. And Dennis is looking at Tesla superchargers with 8 chargers now seeming small. Indeed, there's we know those by the stall maximum power, if everybody's charging, are somewhere between 90 to 100 kilowatts, right? So still not bad as an average charge level, but at these busy sites where they haven't managed to add redundancy nearby, that's going to throw slow throughput for sure. But back to Anthony's question, Walter, which would you take of these two with, on a long trip? Are you looking at something that's got a big charging hub with lots of potential there, or is a 10 to 12 stall just fine as long as it's got the amenities you're looking at?
Amenities all the way. It bothers me to pull into a station where I look around and everything's closed. It's happened too many times. And as an EV driver, I've gotten very spoiled now, being able to pull immediately off an interstate, plug in my car, have plug and charge, immediately start the session for me, being able to walk away, go to the restroom and get myself some refreshments, come back and have the thing halfway done, and then browse social media, disconnect, and get back on the interstate. And I recognize that is a new paradigm shift for what it's like to take a road trip in an EV. That didn't used to be the case, but it was so nice to be able to go from North Carolina to the Grand Canyon, where that was the only thing that I did. I just pulled right off the interstate and chargers were waiting for me right there. I never had to wait, even though there's only 4 chargers per station. I never had to wait, never queued up into a line. And I always had a facility that was open at my disposal. So, 120 stalls in the desert, I suppose, is nice in a case where there's nothing else available and I absolutely have to charge. A lot of people will criticize the Lyric for taking 40 minutes to charge, which I recognize. But one thing people have to understand, the Lyric has a bigger battery. So yes, I'm taking longer to charge, but I'm going further. And it's not as efficient, but I'm okay with that. It's pretty darn comfortable inside the big cabin. Everyone who I hear who gets a Lyric for the first time, one of the first things they remark about is how roomy it is on the inside of the cabin. And that also goes for the Chevy Blazer EV, and to some extent the Equinox, that General Motors is sizing their EVs much larger than their competitors, at least the interior cabin space. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, I guess it depends where I am. On the East Coast, trying to just crank out some miles, I might go with stall count, just purely, and power, just purely so that we can get in and be sure that there's a space. Because a lot of the sites, even some of the 4-stall EVgo's and Pilot Flying J's, are starting to get really oversubscribed. Electrify America is kind of distorted because there's so much free charging that you just can't tell who's there for local free electrons and who's trying to travel. But for the rest of it, it's just, if there's more stalls, I'll gravitate towards that. Going the other way, like the two journeys that I kind of think of are my new journey down the East Coast to North Carolina to my in-laws where they just moved, which is a lot harder because it hits the big cities. You know, you got New York, Philadelphia, DC, and everything in between is just kind of, it's all city charging, so it makes that difficult. Going across to Ohio, that we did a lot in the past, four stalls has been okay generally. It's, you know, and those EVgo sites will still be fine. The ones that are serving that New York throughway in trying to remember the names now, Castleton, place outside of Buffalo. There's a bunch of these Western New York, but that even up to the 6 stalls that Evolve New York's putting in with Electrify America, those seem to be enough as long as they're outside a city. So I'm not so worried about that, but it depends kind of where you're driving, because at that point, you know, if you're not worried about stall count and actually being able to get a charge, the amenities really come into focus, and that's where I'm probably choosing a Pilot Flying J or something that is a place where I know the quantity, know what I'm going to get.
And surely in the areas that you travel, there's you've gotten to the point where there's choice. Like tomorrow, I'm hopping in my Volvo and I'm driving to Jacksonville, Florida from Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm actually going from northern Charlotte, North Carolina to southern Jacksonville. So it's a good stretch of road, and I'm only stopping 2 times. You know, I'll be driving by DC fast chargers galore. I mean, basically every exit along the way, I'll be cruising by DC fast chargers, and I only need to stop at 2. One is going to be in Orangeburg, South Carolina. It's a Tesla supercharger station immediately off the interstate with a canopy at a 24/7 convenience store, which is really nice. The second one is going to be, the name escapes me because I've got a couple of site visits. But anyway, I spotted Earmark in Savannah, Georgia. So Pooler, Georgia. That's the name of that was escaping me. So Pooler, Georgia, and Orangeburg, South Carolina, and then I'm in Jacksonville after that. So there's so many choices now. It's getting to the point where the amount of stations, you know, even if 2 EV people are going on the same road trip, the chance of them stopping at the same stations is very low, and that wasn't the case just 3 years ago. You know, we've definitely started to get ahead of the game, at least for road tripping. There's other problems that need to be solved, but road tripping for sure is starting to get to the point where options are plentiful.
We're also right in the middle of this transition, right? So, you know, I'm still, you know, we're still waiting here for the EGMP cars to get access to the Tesla superchargers, some of which will be available, some of which won't. You know, we've got a lot of different pieces in, you know, waiting to kind of phase out Electrify America. Free plans need to, you know, end, and at that point you get a lot of people flooding into the, you know, starting to figure out how much, you know, where can I charge, which are the other options, is it better to go to a Pilot Flying J?
I have to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole new world. That's why I'm kind of obsessed with pricing. I know some people just, you know, are like looking at it like, well, it's all, you know, much of a muchness. I don't care if it's a few cents per kilowatt hour more, but, you know, it starts to become these differentiating factors of like amenities, 24/7 access, pricing. You know, this stuff all starts to play in. So it's an interesting kind of dilemma that we haven't got to yet, because we just still have people like myself doggedly sticking to try and get the last few free electrons out of their plan.
Speaking of which, that Southern Tier Welcome Center you stopped at, is that station still in existence?
Yes, I think they ripped and replaced some of the hardware.
It
That's
was
happened to a lot of
so
people.
nice looking. I mean, not only the charging right off the interstate, but the facility was beautiful.
Yeah, we're talking about the welcome centers in New York, which are
Hmm.
actually, most of them are new. This is Southern Tier in Binghamton, was the video Walter watched and commented on. But there's also Capital Region Welcome Center just south of Albany, but north of Albany in Queensbury, I think. There's one heading up to the Adirondacks. So a bunch of these are really nice. And that kind of actually is a good point, in that, you know, these would be perfect places for good chargers. I would pay for, you know, I probably would pay over the odds there, because I like those welcome centers and the atmosphere they kind of bring. But the charging itself is free. And what happens with free charging, you know, it's slow, 50 kilowatts usually or less. I think the one up for the Adirondacks is like 20 or 30 kilowatts. They go out of maintenance, and they stay there for a month or two because who's really incentivized to fix a free charger? But the sites themselves are beautiful, and also if you're traveling to these places, it's really useful because you start to have the value of looking around and finding stuff that you may want to do, getting a bit of local history and the education on the area before you hit it. So there are a lot of values to that, but the charging, just compared to like an Evolve New York station, it's night and day. There's just nothing that you would stop at for those other than because of the fact that it's free and you just happen to be able to plug in.
Or just swinging by and just an opportunistic plug.
Yeah, pretty much. That's again, I actually did plug into that one in the Adirondacks on the way to the Rivian charger when that opened up in Queensbury, New York, and it was just I'm not going to stay there. It's there because I go to the restroom and have a look around the place. But the exciting charge on that was the Rivian Adventure Network, not the hokey whatever hardware it was out the back. All right. Let's see what I've missed. I think we're probably going to finish up a little bit earlier tonight, just with the two of us. But we've started to move on in the comments to who's doing well and who may have problems this year. I think that's probably a topic for another show. Let's see. Oh, crazy postman. I don't know if this is really broadcastable, but he thinks that out of spec Kyle has peed in the bush on our live stream, so I can assure you we will not be needing to do any of that, as we're usually live streaming from our homes. One bush per stall is certainly a strategy. That may be what they have to do down at the Giga Hub in Logan, because there's not much else going on there.
Well, they do have the river.
This is true. Peeing in, I don't know if it counts as the Charles at that point, but peeing in it will certainly violate some watershed rules, unfortunately. We may have found another amenity to add to the site review model. That is one I actually want to get to. I think we should probably touch on BP Pulse GigaHubs, but I wanted to kind of start to delineate between metro community and corridor travel sites. What are we thinking in terms of, you visit a lot of these sites all the time. I'm trying to do more of these site reviews this year, but I think you've got it down pat and starting to see where the site value comes in as a travel site and where maybe it needs to score a little bit differently as a metro or community site, or this third place. Do you think we're going to evolve kind of scoring of these things, or separate them out into separate categories because they're just different animals?
I would hope that Eric would give some direction here, because I've been very religious about using his scoring method on every site, regardless of which it is. My personal opinion is really what Eric's scoring method is not a means of saying good or bad. It's a way of opening a discussion about having a driver-focused approach to viewing what a charging site is. So although some sites score good and some sites score bad, really what we're doing is we're looking at the site and we're saying, here's a site, and these are the amenities it has, these are the amenities it doesn't have, and maybe some people this is important for, other people it's not important. And, some people don't like to have anything that's non-vegan food, so fast food is really not a convenience for them. They would have to have some kind of, sushi available or something like that. So for them, they'd rather have a place that didn't have a canopy and window squeegees, as long as it had access to some type of vegan food, and they would place higher value on that site versus other ones. So although it is a single scoring method for each site, I don't think this final score itself is as important as people think, but still, I do think there is a clear delineation, as you suggest, between whether or not I'm on a road trip or whether or not I'm just trying to survive a daily grind with an electric vehicle. So do I have charging at home? Yes, no. If yes, then I'm probably fine with my daily grind, but a lot of people, that's not the case. And in order to get over the EV adoption curve hump, we have to solve that problem one way or the other. And I don't think it's going to be quickly solved by putting in plugs at multi-tenant dwellings. It's going to temporarily be solved by the metropolitan charging stations. And according to the Alternative Fuels Data Center, according to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory study, The majority of DC fast charging stations is going to be Metro. So my personal opinion is, yes, we probably should come up, or Eric should at least give some direction on how to score Metro 1 slightly different, just so there can be a different discussion on the amenities that those offer versus travel sites, because probably a bathroom is not as important at a Metro community site versus a travel corridor. Travel, you're 3 hours in a car and you need to use the restroom, but in a Metro you're just trying to fill up before you go home and eat dinner, and it's not as important. So anyway,
I think we looked at that as we started to ponder the Houston rechargery for Iona, right? That there was perhaps a very small site footprint, but there's a Starbucks right next to it. So for
very important, Starbucks in the morning.
It starts at 5 a.m. or whatever it is, goes through to 8 or 9 whenever they close, and that's your restroom at that point. You're probably not just sitting in the car, as you say. You're going over there, spending a bit of time, and using that as your kind of working place for the morning, or a place to grab your quick coffee and chat. Definitely, I think there's a lot more to be had on this, and I wouldn't want to go too far into it without Eric here, because that's his kind of baby to start with, and we'd want him to unpack some of the kind of considerations there. But yeah, so I think I have the green light to just go ahead and keep on my travel site reviews, and we'll dedicate a full episode at some point to separating out the difference between these sites and what kind of amenities you might want. I'm finishing up the comments here, and then I think we're going to close it down. So Bill B has many EA stations on the East Coast full during the day now, inclined to rent a Tesla for the next trip from Florida to Delaware. Yeah, it's hard to navigate some of these, although I will say, to Walter's point, that a lot of these places, as you kind of travel through them, the EA site is also accompanied with a EVgo site, Delta hardware, 350 kilowatts. Honestly, if I get a chance to use that as I move out of my free plan, I'm going to, because the Auto Charge Plus is much nicer. If I'm on an EVgo plan, that's the only problem I have with them a little bit, is that their pricing is kind of all over the map. So they're either the most expensive if you don't have a plan, because you have to pay the session fee, and then they're already quite expensive, and then their time of use sometimes really brings it down. If you buy the plan, you get quite a good rate, but it's all over the place, and there are a lot of options, is I guess the point.
Yeah, 95 from Delaware to Florida, there's plenty of options. You got the Mercedes-Benz charging hub at the Buc-ee's. You've got the Circle K cohabited site in Wilson. You've got the large Halifax site. You've got multiple Circle K stations further on down in southern North Carolina. You have Georgia is a little bit sparse, surprisingly enough. You would think that Georgia would have been backfilled, but they only have a couple of EA stations. Unless you go rogue on to the Tesla supercharger and you have access to it, and then your options open up a little bit more.
For sure. And then just to finish us off here, we're kind of I'm coming in at the end of a comment stream here, so I don't know where this went in between us talking about live stream peeing in a bush and Crazy Postman. Every postman has peed in a bush, and Mark Beringer sums us up with a new version of does a bear S in the woods, does an EV driver pee in a bush? Well, they may well have to, and that kind of goes back to the core of our topic. So hopefully these sites understand that restrooms are pretty high on our list. Oh, and there's just a good night from Tyler at the Average EV. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out. Eric was possibly caught in our whirlwind changes here. We were possibly going to go to Thursday and then move back to Wednesday, so that's why Walter and I were holding the fort here. But we will, in 2 weeks' time, Eric will be back for sure, because we have Electric Era on as guests to talk about their battery back solutions, which have really served Eric very well, and we're getting some more of those on the East Coast as well now. So we're excited to talk to Quincy and Lang from that side, and that'll be a lot on EV site design, reliability, all the stuff that we care about. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, cheers, nerds.
Good night.